Hello, everybody. My name is Naomi Hazlitt.
I'm an occupational therapist working in Canada. I graduated from my master's in occupational therapy in 2017. And since then, I've worked in lots of different roles. I'm currently a professor and clinical instructor at Centennial College. I also work as an occupational therapist in the community in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I work at a small nonprofit organization that works with individuals with vision loss called Balance for Blind Adults. And so, there, and maybe I'll use some more examples as we go on, I do work with a lot of older adults. I also work at VHA Rehab Solutions, which is a larger community organization, and my role there on the adults team is primarily helping seniors stay safe at home. Other things I do, I work at Level Up Gaming, which is a organization that works with youth with intellectual or learning disabilities, and we do this through running role-playing games. I don't know if I've forgotten anything, but those are, I think, the things I'm currently doing right now. So like I said, I work all along the lifespan, and what your instructor specifically asked me to focus on for this talk today is my role with older adults. So I thought what I would do is I would use some quotes, some images, some stories to tell you how I approach working with older adults, my philosophy, some of the more practical strategies. I might talk a little bit about what working with older adults in Canada is like. I've never been to the UK. I really hope to someday. So without any further ado, here are my thoughts and ideas and clinical knowledge on the OT role with older adults. So as I said, I like to use quotes and images to start getting people thinking about like what is it really about older adults that is unique or different when it comes to occupation and occupational therapy practice. So this quote is by Alex Witchell, and it says, "The older I get, the more I see there are crevices in life where things fall in, and you just can't reach them to pull them back out. So you can sit next to them and weep, or you can get up and move forward. You have to stop worrying about who's not there and start worrying about who is." So I picked this quote for a couple of reasons. I think it's important to acknowledge that older adulthood can, in part, be a time where people are losing certain things. Sometimes it's losing friends, sometimes it's losing function. But, loss is a part of human nature. It's a part of the experience of living. I think everyone here, myself included, has probably experienced a loss before. And I think our role is not to remind people of what they have lost. It is to accentuate what they still have, what they could have, and what the future can bring. And remember that, you have the privilege of being someone involved in an older adult life that can give meaning to their days. However long, however short they might be. It doesn't matter as long as every day is lived meaningfully. It doesn't really matter how much we have. So I hope that makes sense in terms of why I picked this quote. To summarize again, it's about focusing on what we have and not what we've lost. And I think if you come in with that spirit and working with an older adult, you'll be in good shape. In Canada, at the very least, one model we have of practice is PEO. So P stands for person, E stands for environment, and O stands for occupation. And the idea is that there are factors within each of these three categories that shape occupational performance. So the first one is personal factors. So those can include things like cognition, emotion, and physical ability. And so in the older adult, we have certain, challenges that some, not all, but as a general rule of thumb, you may find often that people are experiencing certain challenges in terms of the personal domain. So sarcopenia refers to loss of muscle tone and function. So for a lot of older adults, it's not to say that they can't be physically active at all. In fact, being physically active is highly encouraged, but it might be a little more difficult. It might have to be a little slower. You may have to accommodate for different range of motion and strength. And this is a natural process of aging, but maybe as you'll see later on, it certainly doesn't mean that you have to stop any meaningful activity. It's just something to be aware of. Sensory loss, so often older adults will have hearing and vision loss, and so what we do with them should hopefully accommodate that, whether it's, there are devices like hearing aids and glasses that people can wear clearly to accommodate for hearing and vision loss, but there's also specific strategies that occupational therapists can use, which perhaps I'll talk a little bit about later, like making print larger or speaking more slowly. And, you don't necessarily have to yell at someone who has a hearing impairment, but just making sure you're clearly heard or using multiple methods of communication. Cognitive deficit, again, these are things that you may encounter. I think one of the big themes of my talk today is going to be around stigma and preconception. My grandmother lived to be 94, and she would play online Scrabble every day. She loved showing pictures of her grandchildren on her iPhone, so she never experienced a cognitive deficit, but sometimes people do, and you might commonly encounter people in your practice who have a cognitive deficit. And I think even if you do, I think it's very important to recognize that having a cognitive impairment doesn't mean that you can't make any decisions about your care. You can't have any voice in what activities you participate in. And bottom line, I think focusing on what people have rather than what they have not or don't have is really important. I've had wonderful conversations with people who are living with dementia, and I have learned quite a lot. So something to keep in mind. And at least in the Canadian context, is a huge challenge. Again, can only speak to my own experience, but children get very busy, or there's different barriers like accessibility of transit. So we get a lot of snow in Canada, and that can make it not accessible for seniors to get around. So bottom line, and also sometimes access to technology is a challenge. So older adults are often isolated, and so I think it's important to remember that socialization or friendship is an occupation as well, and something that you can keep in the back of your mind, if nothing else, when working with an older adult. And so, an experience. So that's, I think, the key. I think that, I don't know if that's necessarily a stereotype or a common thought that people have when they think about an older adult. Oh, elders are wise, but really think about what that means. And I really try to challenge myself in thinking, what do I have to learn from this person? Because again, we're also combating a lot of stigma in our society, at least in Canada, but I have suspicion probably in the UK as well, that older people are senile or incompetent. You think about all the experiences that people have had over the years, we have a lot to learn. And so that's important. And I think it's empowering for an older person, just like it would be empowering for any other person, to be able to relate that experience. And so I've had that a lot, especially as an instructor with my students, is that the people they work with really like to talk about, their own experiences and give advice. And I think that's great. Advice, like anything else, some is good and some is bad, but at least listen is sort of the bottom line piece that I'm trying to communicate to you. In terms of meaningful activities, again, everybody is different. I have no idea what kind of activities I'm going to like when I'm an older adult, but I could probably guess they won't be that much different from the activities that I enjoy now. I mean, that being said, I do like to knit and crochet, and I do like crossword puzzles, and, bingo's okay. In all seriousness, though, everybody is different, and that is important. Everyone has different activities that they find unique. That being said, many older adults have experienced caregiving in their lives. Like I said before, mentoring is a empowering role for older adults often. Socialization, so, I've seen so many different groups for older adults. So, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I worked in recreation for quite a while before I became an OT. So to see people come to the Aquafit group and then they would go for coffee after, and that was the highlight of their day. And God forbid anything happened to disrupt that routine. And so, like I said, we have our categories in Canada at the very least of self-care, productivity, and leisure, and all of those are the possibilities are really endless. And finally, I think it's also important to think about the environment where the person is aging. So aging in place is a popular concept right now where we want, I think everybody wants to live their life at their home. And I think when people go into retirement homes and long-term care, that can cause sadness and distress for many because it doesn't feel like home to them. It feels like a place they have to be. That being said, when my grandmother was declining at the end of her life, she did spend a little bit of time in a retirement home and she made some great friends there. And it was a good place for her to be. But I think this trend is part of a larger trend in our society of deep institutionalization. So realizing that we don't want people in institutions, we want people to live in the community because that's what people want. And so we have a really important role to play in terms of helping people stay at home, whether that's equipment, education, strategies, or engagement in meaningful activity throughout the life. And I think I've already spent a lot of time talking about ageism and stigma, but again, remember that, disability or the way people in our world think about older adults can have an impact on their ability to participate in meaningful activities. So I think the onus is on us as occupational therapists to try to break down that stigma and ageism as much as possible. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time going into the person, environment, and occupation factors here and try to bring forth as many examples as I can from my own experience and hopefully leave you with some practical suggestions to start thinking about working with an older adult in general. So this quote by Tennessee Williams is as follows: "I don't ask for your pity, but just for your understanding. Not even that, no. Just for some recognition of me and you, and the enemy time in us all." So that quote stands out to me because, we can definitely talk about specific interventions and strategies, but really this talk is not about that per se. This talk is about really understanding how to relate, to form a therapeutic relationship and to really understand the experience of what it's like to be an older adult. Because I can imagine many of you, like myself, have not had that experience yet. But you have had the experience of being a human being, and believe me, as far as I know, being an older adult doesn't appear to be that far off of the human experience in general. So this image is quite powerful to me because often I think we see a person in a moment of time, who they are right now, rather than who they were in the past. So, in this example, we have a care worker, could even be a nurse, helping a person who used to be a nurse as well. And do we know that person used to be a nurse? If whether we do or not, how does that affect how we see that person, how we approach providing care to them? And so I think it's with this image and what I'm trying to get across is essentially get to know a person. If you get to know who a person is, you're creating a therapeutic relationship, which is the foundation for occupational therapy practice. And you're going to learn a little bit about what they like and dislike and what they want to do with the time that they have. So I did say, though, I was going to talk about strategies. So essentially, one thing that I find very helpful, you may encounter standardized assessments when working with older adults. Those are certainly helpful. But I think we sometimes undervalue just having a conversation. And when I say just having a conversation, it's definitely more than having a conversation. It's about, realizing that the conversation is very important to your process as an occupational therapist. In Canada, we have the Canadian Practice Process Framework. And so the first step is, enter. Then the next one is set the stage. And then the following is assess. And so I think when I started as an OT, I thought, okay, assess. I'm going to find an assessment like the Montreal Cognitive Assessment or the Mini Mental Status Examination or another physical type of assessment. And then I'll know my plan. And then I started working with people, and rightly enough, they started pushing back. And then I realized I can get so much information and so much of what I need just by talking to people, right? So especially when I work with older adults have so many stories, and stories, I could have a whole other talk about how important stories are. But what I'll say for the moment is that, a person telling a story of their life, whether it's the past, the present, or the future, you will find clues to what sorts of activities they enjoy doing and what meaningful occupations they could enjoy participating in now. So, if you're not sure where to start in terms of talking to somebody, I guarantee you, if you find a picture of a person in this older adult's home environment, you say, "Who's that?" You're off to a great start. Because, then you're going to find out about, whether or not the person was a caregiver, who was important in their life, what they did with that person. And it's such a great starting point in terms of reminiscing and remembering those meaningful activities. I think with an interview, if the older adult is open to it or if it's a possibility, get family involved, right? And so that they can work together. Our memory is not insular. It's not, we don't remember things ourselves and ourselves alone. We do rely on other people to help construct past and present events. And that goes for everybody, not just older adults. But I think the process of remembering together gives you even more ideas about what would be the best way to move forward in terms of practice. And then you can kind of use, like I said, in terms of narration, it's a story, and a story has, a beginning and a middle and end, So you can use prompts like, tell me about your life before you came to this facility, right? What are things like right now for you? If you woke up tomorrow and everything was the way you'd like it to be, what would it look like? And I will say, be careful with that prompt. You have to be prepared for what people will say, because people will say things like, and this is kind of, again, veering into solutions-focused coaching, which is another great skill to have in your tool belt. But if people say things like, "I want my youth back," you would say, well, what would that mean if you had your youth back? What could you do? Okay, well, I would be able to ride my bike again. Well, we have a recumbent bike in the exercise room. Maybe we can put a picture of, a video of somebody taking a ride down a sunny street while you bike, which is something I did with older adults. I was in a long-term care center in Canada in a town called Whitby. And at that long-term care center, I started to use audiovisual media to help the exercise program, because, I don't know about you, but biking or running on a treadmill isn't the most engaging thing. And so what I had, I brought in a portable monitor, and I put on YouTube videos. Like everything is on YouTube right now. People will put GoPros on their helmets, and they'll go for a bike ride along the beach. And I would play that, and people were just so happy. The residents of the long-term care center felt like it was a way for them to kind of capture an experience that they had before. And all that comes down to knowing what people like, right? What is important to them, what matters to them. And once you've talked to talk to people, you'll be able to pick up certain cues of what activities people enjoy, whether it was, the work that they used to do, or some of the activities they currently like to do but are challenging for them, or maybe even things they've never tried before. Now, in terms of aging and occupation itself, I wanted to highlight, I think, for all of us, a reminder that essentially life does not stop as you get older. So a quote here is, there is a fountain of youth. It is your mind, your talents, the creativity you bring to your life, and the lives of people you love. When you learn to tap this source, you will truly have defeated age. So this quote is by Sophia Loren. And while how it relates to occupation is the idea that, everyone has a potential, everyone has skills, abilities, some disabilities, true, but having a disability doesn't mean you're not able to do other things. And so, again, in this section, there's so many different occupations that older adults can participate in, but I just wanted to highlight some to get you inspired, essentially, into what you could be enabling or enhancing in terms of meaningful activity in older adults. So, technically speaking, at least in Canada, an older adult is an adult who is 65 years or older. But even if you look at the things that people have achieved, a lot of these statistics and facts very surprised me very much when I looked at them at first. The fact that Leonardo da Vinci was 51 years old when he painted the Mona Lisa. I could have easily imagined that he was in his 20s. And that comes again to stigma and assumptions that we made, right? So now we're getting a little bit up into the older adult territory. So J.R.R. Tolkien, his Lord of the Ring books came out when he was 62. For me, this gets me really excited because I really enjoy writing. And I thought, again, I was thinking to myself the other day, oh, I'm 31 years old and I haven't written a book yet. I'm never going to do this. But that's absolutely not true. And we shouldn't be placing those assumptions that we have on other people too. And you'll hear that. Like, people will have internalized that piece in society. Will they say, well, I'm too old to do this. Are you really? What is really stopping you from writing? I actually do have a client who wrote a book in his 80s about his life as in the war. I think he believed he survived a concentration camp, and he wrote and published a book. It's never too late, and we engage in activities our entire lives. And I can keep going, we have Nelson Mandela. He was 76 when he became president. Imagine that, it's, you could become president someday. I could become president someday, or clearly I can't become president, but I could become the Prime Minister of Canada. And again, just to highlight some powerful, strong, older adults. Some people that I've encountered, Madame Suzanne Poole, who's a ballerina and ballet instructor at 77 and still going strong. Tal Porchon Lynch is 97 years old and she continues to work as a yoga instructor. We have Wang Od Oge, who, last but certainly absolutely not least, is 101 years old and works as a tattoo artist in the Philippines. So occupation is part of human nature. We participate in occupation throughout our whole lives. And so what I wanted to do with this example of all these people is to start to get you thinking when you look at the older adult in front of you, to not think, oh, this person, their life is in decline. What's the point? They're not going to be able to do very much. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if, somebody has, again, maybe some more barriers, whether it's cognitive decline or physical decline. Like, there is potential to engage in meaningful activity for all people, is the point that I'm trying to make. And what we do in our role as occupational therapists is to make occupation more accessible. So, again, some may look at a wheelchair and say, oh, this person can't walk anymore. Instead of, oh, this person has a wheelchair. They can roll places. They can travel. A wheelchair could be the difference between an older adult gardening or staying in their room. Goes for a walker. making print large could be the difference between doing a crossword puzzle or playing a board game with someone or not. Lighting is also huge, and I don't have time to go through lighting today, but if anyone's interested in strategies for, vision loss, which is a specialty of mine, I'm happy to make another video to speak to your professor. You know, shoe grips are a great example of how to keep people safe in the winter. Keeping people safe in the winter allows for winter activities, so we don't have to hibernate. And I put an example of larger knitting needles, and that could make the difference between actually allowing somebody to knit or not. So I think you're getting the idea. Again, chair yoga. It allows somebody who has a difficulty getting down on the floor to continue to participate in a meaningful activity. So I think the gift that OT has to bring is to look at an activity and say, someone can still do this, and how are we going to make it accessible? I have a few more thoughts about the environment. So here are some examples of environmental modifications I have made. So especially I wanted to bring your attention to the middle slide. So you'll see there's a note up above. And I just wanted to highlight some things. So first of all, it's very small. It's difficult to read. It doesn't recognize that a person who is an older adult may have reduced vision and so may have difficulty reading. The other thing that these slides do not, or excuse me, these original signs do not include is, in this situation, my client spoke Chinese. So the fact that these signs are not even in the person's original language. So I think, again, this is why it's so important to get to know what the person's abilities and challenges are. Because, this is the unique contribution OT has, is to be able to design an environmental modification that actually makes sense and works for the person, right? I wanted, again, I thought when I was thinking about what examples to include of how the environment facilitates occupational performance, I actually thought about my time as a lifeguard and a pool supervisor. So this is Regent Park Aquatic Center, which was renamed more recently to Pam McConnell Aquatic Center. And I worked in this center for about 5 or 6 years. And it was my favorite place. It wasn't even close to my home. There were closer pools that I could work at. But this, to me, was a representation of the accessible and inclusive environment. So, every pool has a ramp. The pool is at surface, is flush or level with the ground, so that it's easier for somebody to get in and out of the pool. There is a high contrast, so the tiles are white, but the grate around the pool is black, so it's easier with somebody with vision loss to tell where the pool is and to be safe. And then you have even things like icons, right? So rather than using language, like the signs in my previous example in a long-term care facility, you have symbols. So things like the red circle with the white horizontal line, that is more of a universal symbol that says don't go, right? And then you have the arrow pattern in the tile on the ground, which is indicating the direction that you want to go. So this is accommodating for essentially everybody, but I think universal design is especially important for seniors because as they age they might have more impairment. And, I feel like if more places were built like Pam McConnell Aquatic Center, we would be out of a job because so much of our time is spent trying to provide equipment and adaptations to make an inaccessible place accessible. Like I said, this is a whole other area you could spend a lot of time talking about, but I wanted to get you kind of thinking about what environments are conducive or not conducive to meaningful occupation for an older adult or any other person. Here is an example of an environmental modification that allows the older adult to have a voice. So this client that I worked with, she was losing function in the muscles of her neck and throat, and so she was very quiet, and it took her a long time to have herself heard. And she lived in a long-term care facility, so I worked with older adults in the community as well as in long-term care with a project that came about through a partnership with Centennial College and a long-term care facility in Scarborough, Ontario, which is about a little ways off to the east of Toronto proper. And so this individual, the problem that we were having is that, nursing staff or personal support workers didn't have the time to sit with her and really get to know what she liked and disliked. And also because there's so much turnover in terms of nursing and personal support worker staff in at least Canada, and there's loads of challenges that, again, that's a story for another day. But all it is to say is, I came in and I thought, well, what can I do as an occupational therapist to enable this person to have their voice be heard and what they would like to do? So here is it's a simple thing. I had my students go and sit down with this woman and ask her, what would you like people to know about taking care of you? And we made this sign, and as far as I know, it's up in her room to this day. And so again, this is something that no other person in the long-term care center thought about, and it's because of that unique understanding we have of considering the person as a whole. And this environmental enhancement, I hope, will help this person continue to engage in meaningful activity. So even just things like, rearranging the radio, if it's out of reach, she wouldn't be able to turn it off and on independently. So we've enabled a meaningful activity of listening to the radio by ensuring that the staff let her know when they're rearranging her equipment or items. Sometimes these things seem so small, but believe me, they make a huge difference. So a quote for you, and I again wanted to leave this with you as you kind of go into more specifics of your program. And that is, I think the core of what older adults or any person might want. What we ask is to be allowed to remain the writers of our own story. That story is ever changing. Over the course of our lives, we may encounter unimaginable difficulties. Our concerns and desires may shift. But whatever happens, we want to retain the freedom to shape our lives in ways consistent with our character and loyalties. This is Atul Gawande, Being Mortal, Medicine, and What Matters in the End, which is a great book. It is on my book list currently. So again, I think no matter what you do, if you can empower a person, that is an incredibly meaningful act, especially when working with older adults, because as vulnerable people, they often have agency taken away from them. So that's all I have for you. If you have any questions for me, you can reach me at naomihazlett@gmail.com. So that's naomi.hazlett@gmail.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me there. There's so much to talk about when working with older adults, but I hope I have achieved my purpose today, which is to give you a foundation, a general understanding of some of the challenges older adults may face, some of the occupations that they might enjoy and how to tap into that, and some ideas for how to use equipment or modify the environment to make it easier for older adults to live meaningful, fulfilling lives. So take care, everyone. All the best with your studies, and feel free to reach out if you want to know more.